Our theme this month is It's Time to Morph into Spring. And today's topic is moving on up. The word morph comes from the word metamorphosis, which is a Greek word meaning to transform. When I shared with you the concept from sprouting to blooming to withering to bulbing in nature's cycle of life, and this was in the talk I did 2 weeks ago, that was an example of morphing. And today I'd like to share with you the idea that moving on up is another form of metamorphosis in this thing we call life. Leighton Ford, who is a Presbyterian minister, was once quoted as saying, "God loves us the way we are, but loves us too much to leave us that way." So today, on what is celebrated by Christians in the Western world as Easter, I'd like to share with you some thoughts about this holiday from a metaphysical perspective. I've done this before, you know. Actually, as a matter of fact, this is the 19th time I've done this, starting in 2001, which was the first Easter after I was licensed as a minister in Religious Science International. And I always look for expanding ways and ideas about this series of events in the story of the life of Jesus. As I look around the room, though, I'm the only one who has heard me discuss it in these previous 18 times, all 18 of them. So I'm the only one who would know what I've already said. But those of you who know me, and those of you who have chosen to study metaphysics, know that the very study of this philosophy offers us the opportunity to morph, that is, to transform our very being from the ever-expanding knowledge and understanding of metaphysics. Metaphysically speaking, the character of Jesus, from his conception to his resurrection, is the symbolic journey of the soul. Not just his soul, every soul. So if we go back over thousands of years, throughout the ages, we find references to a cosmic savior in practically every religion, every spiritual teaching, including paganism. They all partake of a heroic journey with many trials and tests along the way, eventually being either crucified or killed, only to rise again, unvanquished. So the resurrection story is not confined to Christian teachings. In fact, it was in the process in various other teachings before Jesus was said to have walked on the earth. Ernest Holmes was a firm believer in the resurrection of Jesus as a real event. He believed this because his concept of body was a metaphysical one. However, he did not confine his ideas to just the body of Jesus. He maintained that all bodies were formed of the same substance, which he referred to as the ethers. Now remember, he was writing this back in the 1920s, and that was a well-known and used term. We would think of it as the cosmic energy now. This is what he called the spiritual body, or the body of light, which is the true body of every individual. He believed that when individual consciousness, that is awareness, is spiritualized by the realization of its cosmic oneness with the universe, for example, as in the case of the evolved consciousness of Jesus, this would create a quickening and an intensity of vibration within that individual. You see, these are things that we know exist now because we can actually track them with the modern conveniences like quantum telescopes and microscopes, and like the quality of work that is being done in the medical sciences now, where we're finding more and more the parallel of physical and spiritual laws, such that these physical laws are now beginning to not only support but actually underlie a lot of what metaphysicians have been saying for many, many years, even into centuries. So the result of what I just talked about, the evolving consciousness of Jesus and each one of us, because contained within us is that same Christ consciousness, creates a quickening and an intensity of vibration within and around each individual. The result would be a disappearance of the physical illusionary sense of self, revealing the true body, which is the immortal self. This body would be invisible to the human mind because it only relates to life through the human senses, that is, the human mind. It expects to see separate physical concepts, and so it does. For those of you who are Harry Potter fans, this may have a ring of the familiar in those contemporary writings. If you are so inclined, do some checking of the invisible cloak theory. And if you are a quantum physics follower, do some research on shape-shifting. You see, these are terms that didn't exist when Dr. Holmes was here with us, but they have come as we have morphed, we have moved up, not only in our understanding, but in our language as well. So Holmes goes on to say, Jesus revealed himself to his followers after his resurrection to show them that death is but a passing to a higher sphere of life and action. You're also perhaps aware of the fact that many did not see him. Think about that. So, what after considering all of this, one still believes that the Easter story, and there are many Easter stories, the one I'm talking about today is the one we know of in the Western Hemisphere coming out of the Christian faith. There are many other stories from other faiths that are similar, but each is unique in its own way. So, what if it's just a myth? So what? Actually, that's okay too. That's fine, because the myth tells the same story in symbolic form. However, first we need to clarify what we mean by a myth. For some people, the understanding of myths is that they belong in the realm of fantasy, fairy tales, and entertainment. But nothing could be further from the truth. As we have seen in the works of Joseph Campbell and others like him, the history of humanity is rich and full of wonderful myths which have great meaning, great moral messages, and great demonstrations of faith. Such is the case in the resurrection story. The same story in symbolic form still has great meaning, a great moral message, and the concept that with faith, all things are possible. Metaphysically, the story of the resurrection of Jesus reveals to us our own spiritual journey. Metaphysically, the crucifixion is the symbol crossing out of our lower self. Metaphysically, the tomb represents the place of transformation that enables us to break out of the restrictions of the human mind. And metaphysically, the resurrection symbolizes our rise in consciousness to claim our own spiritual identity. And it is that eternal self that cannot die, which is of the same nature as its source, God, Spirit, divine intelligence. The good news, though, is that we don't have to die to be resurrected. Every time we move through a past restriction and take another step along the spiritual path, we're crossing out the old. We're rolling away that stone of limitation. And we're rising in consciousness to the new. These, then, become our own demonstrations that faith makes all things possible. And what matters is that we hear in the descriptions I've just shared with you the concept of moving upward, onward, and forward. One, that metaphysically, the story of the resurrection reveals to us our own spiritual journey, upward, onward, and forward. Two, that metaphysically, the tomb represents the place of transformation that enables us to break out of the restrictions of the collective consciousness so that we can move on in consciousness. Three, that metaphysically, the resurrection symbolizes our rise in our consciousness to claim our spiritual identity. You see, the crossing out of our lower self is an act of transformation, which enables us to break out of the restrictions of the human mind, operating at the level of the collective consciousness, and move on into a higher consciousness, which is an ongoing dialogue with your source of being. So that was then, and here's now. I want to share with you now a blog that I found on the source of all knowledge, which I call Google. The name of this writer is Sonio, not Sonia, but Sonio Esteville. Anyone here recognize that name? Nah, I didn't think so. Probably not. So let me give you some information about her. Here is how Sonio describes herself. She says, first and foremost, I am not a psychiatrist. I am not a physiologist. I am not a therapist. I am not a doctor. But I put myself through film school working with child abused kids ranging from ages 5 to 18. And in the 7 years of working with them, I learned some valuable lessons. Childhood pain often follows adults all throughout their lives, consequently creating more than the average challenges in everyday experiences. She goes on to say, and while I do not have a PhD to bring to the table, I do have a GLE, a genuine life experience degree. I am a filmmaker, I'm a documentarian, I am a producer and overall creative soul who believes in the power of the mind to manifest abundance in our lives. I am here to champion everyone. I found this in a blog on the internet. So why am I giving you all this information about somebody previously not on your radar or mine, so to speak? Because first I shared with you what was then, the past, and now I'm sharing with you what is now, a blog on the internet. She goes on to say, beyond religious dogma lies a deeper meaning that can be utilized for anyone inclined to live a more fulfilling life. Does this sound familiar to any of you? Oh, yes. Easter can be a powerful metaphor, she says, one that helps us to re-examine our current state of being and then decide how we need to evolve. It can be a great day, she said, similar to New Year's Day, to become motivated to change what needs to be changed and let go of what needs letting go. When the new year comes around, she continues, everybody's ready to set new goals, complete objectives, and reach milestones. And the cause of this sudden burst of enthusiasm, motivation, and intent is the concept of a fresh start, a clean slate, an opportunity to make right our wrongs. Easter, Sonia says, can be another day to be just like that, to do just like that. You can decide what is working in your life and what needs to change. Now, here's my punchline. so to speak. How did Sonyo's blog pop up in my search? I had Googled Dennis Merritt Jones' book. You'll remember this from last week. The Art of Uncertainty. And there she was. She wrote, I started reading a powerful book by Dennis Merritt Jones, The Art of Uncertainty. And in chapter 4, she says, he guides readers through identifying when and what to let go of in your life. I laughed out loud. LOL, I laughed out loud. I talked about this book last week in the talk, Walking Your Talk. In her blog, she goes on to elaborate on many of the ideas that Dennis shares in this book. So you can read her blog if you choose, or you can read Dennis's book about carrying around an old story, an old mantra, or an old belief system that has become a hindrance. This is how the word of science of mind spreads. It pops up on the internet, and somebody who's never heard any of this before finds it, writes a blog that goes to hundreds of thousands of people. That's how we spread the word. So, is the story of the literal resurrection of Jesus a myth or a reality? Only you can decide that for yourself. And what does it matter? What matters is the message of our own individual spiritual journey and of our own recognition of the Christ consciousness within each one of us. And recognizing that the metamorphosis of each one of us, transforming what has come before us into what has meaning and power in the present moment, is why we are living in this moment, in this place, with the present day opportunities that are ours to utilize in this day. We could call that moving on up. And so it is.